Okay, Oklo just reported zero revenue at a $33 million loss, and somehow the headline is still, wow, this company now has a $2.5 billion war chest.
Nuclear finance is not for people who need emotional consistency.
Exactly. This is Earnings Unscripted, and today is May 12th, 2026 for posterity. We're looking at Oklo, ticker OKLO, Q1 2026. Advanced nuclear, tiny fast reactors, big AI-powered dreams. And this quarter was basically no sales yet, but a lot of concrete, permits, cash, and dilution.
Yeah. The simple version is negative 19 cents of diluted EPS, zero revenue because they're still pre-commercial, and no meaningful operating margin because, well, there's no top line to divide by. Operating loss was about $51 million. So this is not a did they beat revenue by 2% story. We also don't have a clean consensus cop in the brief, so I'm not going to cosplay certainty there.
Thank you for not cosplaying. Though, honestly, markets do love costumes. And the stock did not love this print, right?
No. Separate from the quarter itself, which had already been rough for the stock, the earnings window reaction was negative. After hours, the last print was around 71.50, down about 8.5% versus the prior close. So investors looked at the cash pile and still said, okay, but how much road is between here and actual revenue?
And just to keep the lawyers calm while we talk about radioactive startup capitalism, this is personal opinion, not financial advice.
A sentence I want engraved on every SPAC-era tombstone.
Horrible. Accurate. So, Miro, give me the gut read, because I look at this and see two stories fighting each other. One is they raised cash brilliantly. The other is they are burning money before the machine exists.
That's exactly it. The cash balance jumped from about $1.4 billion last quarter to $2.54 billion now, mostly because they sold stock aggressively through the ATM program, roughly 12.4 million shares at an average net price just under $97. That is opportunistic, maybe even very smart, but it came with share count up over 8% quarter over quarter. So existing holders funded the runway.
Right. Shareholders got diluted, but the company got oxygen.
More than oxygen. This is a bunker full of oxygen tanks. Operating cash burn was only about $18 million in the quarter, but CapEx was $33 million, and guidance implies the real spending ramps through the year. They're preparing for physical deployment, not just engineering studies.
This is where it gets oddly tangible, because with Oklo, the relatable part is not, a new app icon. It's dirt, foundations, heavy equipment.
Exactly. Management said the Groves isotope facility went from an empty site to substantial completion in 229 days. That matters because nuclear's great historical sin is time. 15 years, budget overruns, everyone ages visibly. Oklo is trying to prove small reactors can be built with a construction tempo people associate with warehouses, not traditional nuclear plants.
And they're targeting July 4th for criticality at Groves, which is almost too cinematic. Like, if Hollywood wrote that, I'd tell him to dial it down.
It is very on the nose. But if they hit it, it becomes a proof point. Not commercial scale yet, not broad NRC approval yet, but a proof point. And meanwhile, you have Meta prepaying for fuel tied to a Plant, Ohio campus, PJM interconnection filing starting, NVIDIA and Los Alamos in the AI design loop. The narrative is powerful.
But the market's saying, powerful narrative, show me cash generation.
Yes. The first isotope contract they teased for 2026 becomes important because right now, Oklo is still a capital story. The moment even modest revenue appears, the conversation changes from science project with money to early infrastructure platform.
Okay, so headline, no revenue, real losses, huge liquidity, more dilution, and one very spicy question hanging over the whole thing. Can they turn nuclear ambition into repeatable construction before investors run out of patience?
That's the whole episode.
All right, let's get into the details.
The detail I care about is not the loss, actually. It's that Oklo is trying to solve three bottlenecks at once: licensing, fuel, and construction. The reactor is almost the visible tip of the thing.
Okay, wait, say that like I'm not reading RSC acronyms at midnight, because solve licensing can mean anything from reforming a process to, politely begging a regulator not to crush your timeline.
Fair. In Oklo's case, it's sequencing. They're using DOE pathways, specifically these other transaction agreement structures, to move early projects like Groves and Aurora INL forward on federal ground. That gives them physical evidence, real facilities, real safety work, before they rely on broad commercial NRC licensing.
So it's like building the demonstration kitchen inside the landlord's house first.
Weirdly, yes. And then the next step is NRC Part 57, which management is clearly very excited about. DeWitt said, quote, Part 57 is designed around faster, repeatable deployment, and he pointed to NRC discussed timelines of 6 to 12 months. That is the entire commercial dream in one sentence.
Because if licensing takes years, the modular story loses its magic.
Exactly. The valuation needs repeatability, not one heroic reactor, a fleet. Same design, faster approvals, lower friction each time. But, and this is the red flag, Part 57 is still a framework in motion. If it gets delayed, amended, or becomes less friendly than they expect, the DOE path is a bridge, not the whole highway.
Right. It gets you moving, but it doesn't mean you can suddenly put these things everywhere Meta wants power.
Yes. And then there's fuel, which is maybe the most underrated issue. Advanced reactors need specialized fuel. HALE supply is still not a mature commercial chain. Oklo's answer is pretty clever. Use surplus defense plutonium blended with uranium and zirconium as a bridge fuel for plutonium-based fast reactor work.
Which is wild. It's literally Cold War leftovers being recast for the AI electricity age.
It is elegant in a very strange way. Swords to plowshares, but with compliance paperwork. The upside is obvious. Don't wait for a perfect commercial fuel market to exist. Use material the government already has and turn it into proof. The downside is also obvious. You are depending on government-controlled materials, government approvals, and a supply chain partly being built around your specific reactor class.
So the cash pile helps, but it doesn't magically create fuel.
Correct. Money buys engineers, buildings, equipment, options. It does not conjure licensed nuclear fuel infrastructure from the ether. That's why I think investors should separate liquidity risk from execution risk. Liquidity risk is much lower after this quarter. Execution risk is still very alive.
That's a useful distinction. They solved the can we afford to try problem. They have not solved the can we repeatedly deliver problem.
Exactly. And one more thing I liked, actually, is Eielson Air Force Base. It's easy to talk about data centers because Meta and NVIDIA are shiny names, but Eielson is more interesting operationally. That project is being designed around cogeneration, meaning steam for district heating alongside about 5 megawatts of electric power.
Steam is less glamorous than AI, but in Alaska, it's not exactly a side quest.
No, that's the point. Small reactors may be most valuable where heat matters as much as electrons. Defense bases, industrial sites, remote operations. If your product is reliable heat plus power, you are not just competing in the grid marketplace. You are replacing fuel logistics, boiler systems, resilience planning.
That makes the business feel more real to me. Like, not just please imagine a nuclear future, but this base needs heat every winter, no drama.
Right, but it also tests the standardization claim. If every site needs a special thermal setup, a special grid interconnection, a special customer arrangement, then repeatable deployment becomes harder, not impossible, just less like stamping out servers and more like infrastructure engineering.
So the dream is factory rhythm. The reality may be custom kitchens.
That's a good way to put it. And management knows this. DeWitt had that line about nuclear tailwinds shifting from policy endorsement to execution. I like the phrase, but it's also a warning label. Policy endorsement is applause. Execution is concrete, fuel, inspections, grid queues, customer signing binding contracts.
And nobody gets paid in applause. Tragically, for podcasters everywhere.
Speak for yourself. I accept applause and marketable securities.
Of course you do. So, okay, deep dive takeaway. Oklo's quarter is less about earnings, because there aren't really earnings yet, and more about whether they're assembling a credible deployment machine.
Yes,
reactor company, fuel company, regulatory strategy company, construction company. They have to be all of those at once. That's the opportunity and the headache.
Which sets up the real question for the outlook. What would actually count as proof that this machine is starting to work?
Proof would be three things, I think. First, Groves actually reaches criticality around that July 4 target. Second, the pending isotope contract becomes real revenue in 2026. And third, Part 57 keeps moving in a form that actually helps them, not just sounds nice on slides.
Yeah, because the market can tolerate losses if the milestones start converting. It cannot live forever on vibes, concrete, and patriotic reactor dates.
Exactly. And guidance tells you management knows the next phase gets heavier. They expect full-year operating cash use of about $80 to $100 million, plus $350 to $450 million in investing cash outflows. So the question is not, do they have cash? They do. The question is whether spending turns into repeatable proof.
And that is where investor sentiment feels so split to me. The balance sheet is genuinely impressive, but the share issuance also raised the bar. If shareholders funded the runway, they are going to want visible takeoffs, not just more runway.
Right. The CFO said the financing leaves them, quote, well-positioned to execute in 2026 and beyond. Fair. But well-positioned is not the same as de-risked. Nuclear has a way of humbling confident verbs.
That should be embroidered on a very expensive hard hat.
I would buy one. For research.
So next quarter, I'm watching milestones, not EPS. Groves timing, isotope revenue, any binding customer movement, and whether the PJM and licensing pieces look like momentum or drag.
Same. If those move, Oklo starts looking less like a story stock and more like an infrastructure company being born. Slowly, expensively, but maybe for real.
That's the tone, isn't it? Big promise, big burn, actual progress, and absolutely no room for hand-waving.
Nuclear startups where optimism wears steel-toed boots.
Perfect. On that glowing little image, we'll leave it there. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Take care.
If you want these earnings drops to just show up when a new quarter lands, following the show is probably the easiest little habit. And quick transparency note, Earnings Unscripted is created with AI-assisted writing and voice tools grounded in source materials like company filings and earnings call transcripts, not vibes in a blender. If you have feedback or a ticker you want us to look at, send it to earningsunscripted@datamadness.ca. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
See you next quarter.